The Cannabis Conversation. A European perspective on the emerging legal cannabis industry.
Welcome to the Cannabis Conversation with Anuj Desai, where we explore the new legal cannabis industry by speaking to the professionals that are helping to shape it. On today's show, we have Marion Mariathasan, who is founder of Simplifya, who are a cannabis compliance business based out of the US. Marion, welcome. How are you?
Doing well, Anuj. Thanks for having me.
No, real pleasure. Where in the world are you today?
Today, I am in Denver, Colorado, and this is where myself and Simplifya were based out of.
Brilliant. That's, as we were talking about, it's ground zero for the cannabis world.
That is exactly right. It's we've watched a lot of things unfold out of here and expand out of Colorado, so it's a good place to be.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, it would be good to talk about that actually in a second when we start to talk about the business. The usual place to start is with a bit about you, though. If you could maybe just introduce yourself, tell us what your background is, where you came from before the cannabis industry, and how and why you got into it.
Sure. So, as you kindly pointed out, Marion Mariathasan. I'm originally from an island called Sri Lanka. Went to college here at the University of Kansas. I was an architecture and computer science major. Graduated from college, did the typical path of, joining corporate America. Did about 7 years stint there. Since then, I've actually been an entrepreneur, starting building and selling tech companies primarily for the last 18 plus years. Prior to getting into the cannabis industry, my brother and I owned a tequila company, which we sold in 2015. And I jumped into the cannabis industry primarily because of the law firm called Vicente Sederberg. Vicente Sederberg was the law firm that was very instrumental in Amendment 64, which legalized recreational cannabis in Colorado. And the three partners were friends of mine, and they had an idea for a compliance play, a compliance software concept. And so, I went in and they pitched me on the idea, and here we are. It's called Simplifya.
Yeah, fantastic. And so did it feel like quite a natural step from tech to, well, I guess you're kind of applying a form of tech to this new industry, right?
That's exactly right. I mean, Simplifya is a rec tech company. And so while Simplifya consists primarily of lawyers and engineers, the tech aspect and the SaaS aspect of a software company and my background, that certainly applies to what we're doing now.
Yeah, fantastic. And how did you approach the idea of the cannabis industry? It's still relatively new, but when you got into it, it was even newer, I guess. Were there any kind of hesitations, or were you worried about the stigma, or any friends kind of give you any funny looks?
Well, Anuj, it's funny you ask, because I actually have a very supportive family and a group of friends. My father did say, "What's up with you and vices?" Because, right prior to getting into cannabis, I was in the tequila industry. And so he did have a little chuckle about that. But no, the more I got to learn about cannabis through friends and so forth, I realized the medical aspects of it had such benefits that, I was so surprised that, this natural plant has been hidden or, kept away from, society for so long that I felt like it was something that I really wanted to get behind. And so it was very easy transition, in terms of looking at the path forward for this tech company, but also the human use of this plant. And so it was, it's been just an amazing ride ever since.
Yeah, that's brilliant. That's brilliant. And how did it lead to starting Simplifya?
Yeah, so as I had mentioned earlier, Anuj, it was the law firm Vicente Sederberg. They really had a great concept, I think, but they were attorneys and they wanted to bring in some expertise or second set of eyes around how can we, make this concept more viable or get it to market. And so, I actually ended up being one of the first investors alongside of them. And what I think they had the wherewithal and the foresight to realize that cannabis was not just going to be a Colorado movement or a US movement. It was going to be, a global movement. And so what they realized was there needed to be kind of an efficient, streamlined way for license operators to stay in compliance with state and local regulations or regulations in general, right? Operational and regulatory compliance. And so, we actually set out asking a lot of questions initially. So we went to small operators, larger operators, and said, what are your biggest pain points? And as you can imagine, this was back in the early days. And so people were very open and eager to share, what they needed in terms of how to stay compliant. And so taking all that data and feedback, we started assembling or building the software called Simplifya from ground up. And over the years, the product has evolved. There's multiple products within Simplifya now, and it's all really designed around, keeping these licensed operators out of trouble and making their lives easier.
Yeah, I think that's the key, isn't it? I suppose, not to be negative, but possibly compliance is not the sort of favorite area of every entrepreneur.
Correct.
And so if you could take that off their hands, I suppose that's a really valuable service.
Yeah, and it's a costly service, right? And as you can appreciate, when lawyers are amazing in what they do, but when you're talking about scaling and when you have to engage with lawyers often because these regulations are changing often, right? And so when you have to bring in attorneys, even Vicente Cederberg, their whole law practice was built around keeping these businesses compliant, but also creating regulations in new emerging markets. And what they recognized very quickly was it just wasn't cost efficient or efficient to keep bringing in outside people to, audit your businesses. And so that's kind of the idea that Simplifya is built out of. It's more around self-auditing and having these historical records of compliance so that if regulators were to walk in, you can show them, here are all the things that I've been doing as an operator to make sure that I am abiding by the rules and regulations of your state and local municipality. And that's really kind of what we started off doing.
Yeah, absolutely. And so what are some of the big areas that you cover then?
So, we first started off on covering, all the rules and regs for the licensed operators, right? So, which meaning we ingest, basically state and local municipality regulations. We convert them into a 12th grade reading level, and we convert them into a yes or no auditable questions. So that's where we started off. But over time now, we've had financial institutions that have approached us and said, look, we're now taking on licensed operators, and we need to make sure that they are abiding by state and local regs. So we've now created a product for financial institutions. We closed our first insurance group, who wanted to monitor licenses on behalf of their licensed operators on an ongoing basis. So we do that for insurance groups now. We also now have a product for government. So we actually have this new product for government enforcement officers that's being tested as we speak. And so, we've expanded from just servicing the licensed operator now into all sorts of different areas, and which has all been very exciting because, we don't want to veer too far from what our core competency is. But, in the space of cannabis, we've come to recognize that there are other types of users that can use our expertise in our software. And so, it's just evolving over time. We're coming up on 5 years this November as a company, and we can talk about this if you like. We just closed our Series B, and we're getting ready to add some new lines of business. So it's been very interesting, to say the least.
Yeah, that's brilliant. We'll talk about it in a second, actually. But one of those things that most entrepreneurs and startups go through, particularly in an emerging industry, is you kind of, there's so many unknowns. So, how have you found that journey, and have there been any kind of pivots or things that have surprised you along the way that you've decided to look more into?
Yeah, fortunately for us, we've stayed the course, in terms of focusing on the compliance side. But as any startup, we take feedback from our clients or our end users very seriously. And so we are constantly in an iterative process of refining, our product. Even if you just take one of our core products, the audit product, I can't tell you how many times it's been worked on and reiterated and refined over the last 4.5 years, because I'm certainly of one to think that when you stop innovation, when you stop progressing, then you're really not serving yourself or your clients, right? And so from that aspect, we continually improve, and innovate. And we have a full feedback loop built in within the company. But in terms of pivoting, we've been very fortunate in knowing that we knew we wanted to stay in the regulatory and operational compliance side. We knew the importance of that. So we've stayed true to that, from day one. But we have, as I mentioned earlier, gone through quite a bit of iterations of our product within that to ensure that we're continually addressing the needs of our clients.
Yeah, absolutely. You can't really rest on your laurels. You're going to always learning, right?
Correct. Yeah.
And I guess you guys must have been one of the first to sort of really kind of try and grab the compliance arena. Firstly, is that true? But also, have you noticed more competitors coming into the space?
So, we actually weren't the first. There were a few other companies in the space before us. They are no longer in the space, unfortunately for them, but fortunately for us. What we do takes so much time, energy, and money, Anuj, that we haven't seen anyone that really has come out to challenge us in the depth and breadth of what we do, right? Because if you really look at it, it's, we're not only continually ingesting all the rules and regulations, not just on a state level, but on a local municipality level, right? So if you take Colorado as an example, the state of Colorado might have 400 lines of regulations, and then the city of Denver might have another 300 lines of regulations. And these are, depending on the state and local municipality, it's changing. And so just ingesting all that and going through the process of creating the software, it really is a cumbersome process and a timely and costly process. And I think for that reason, not too many people have ventured into this area as they have in other areas of the cannabis industry.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah. So there is a bit of a moat around you.
We certainly have built a moat now. We've ingested, millions and millions of words of regulations and just the database of citation numbers that go with it. I mean, one of the things I'm really proud of is, when we got into this space, it's not to pick on POS or loyalty, but, you can potentially go to the restaurant industry and borrow a POS and then kind of customize it for the cannabis industry. Whereas when we're talking about a true compliance product, it had to be built from ground up, right? And it took us probably about 3.5 years to where we felt like, wow, it's finally there, but as I said earlier, we're still constantly improving it. And so when you build something completely new for an entirely new emerging industry, it's quite a bit of work. And I think for all those reasons, we have been able to kind of stay on edge, kind of ahead if anyone decides to come and compete, which, I'm sure at some point there will be more, but so far we've been pretty well unchallenged.
Yeah, wow. Well, credit to you guys for putting in all that effort and establishing yourself. So just before we move on to the sort of general topic of compliance, maybe we'll kind of flip back around to the investment that you mentioned. Again, quite a pivotal part of the startup world. How did you find that process? And yeah, just your general reflections, and congratulations on closing it as well.
Thank you. So, raising money for any entrepreneur, any startup is, some of the most tiresome process, I would say. For us, we were very fortunate from the get-go because I would say even though I was entirely new to the cannabis industry, again, I'll reference Vicente Cederberg, right? I mean, these guys, Brian Vicente has been, some shape, some form, has been advocating for cannabis, from back in 2010, I believe. And so he's a guy that was truly passionate about cannabis. And when we got into it, the fact that we had Vicente Cederberg and their credibility behind the name of Simplifya certainly helped us gain quick attention and traction. Then outside of that, having done startups in the past, I was able to kind of reach out to other investors and partners that I'd worked with in the past. And so, we were very fortunate to be able to raise money, and this was very patient money, Anuj, right? Because it's, as I told investors early on, this is going to be a longer ride than the typical startup that's, a 3 to 4 year type of exit, at least the ones I've been involved in the past. And so people recognize that. They knew the industry was evolving, and, we're coming up on 5 years now, and we've raised a total of $15 million to date. the most recent round we closed was 6 million Series B. And so the process for this company has been, I don't want to say easier, but a little bit more on the lighter side than other startups in terms of the ups and downs, but it's still a process.
Yeah, absolutely. And I can imagine the emphasis on patient capital is necessary here. And I suppose when you're dealing with tech investors, they generally want quite quick returns. So they probably expect quick returns given some of the things that have gone on.
It's true. But I think, again, kind of telling the story to investors, as you can imagine, back 5 years ago, a lot of the investors that I was bringing in that I knew were not even, in tune with cannabis. And so it was really about telling them the story of what we were trying to build, why it was going to make such a positive impact, not only on the industry, but outside the industry, as the cannabis industry kind of evolved. And so it really was kind of explaining things from bottom up and helping them kind of visualize where we were headed. And, really the company always had ambitions, not just to be servicing the license operators, but as I'd mentioned, into the financial industry and insurance and government. So, you find the right investors and they will support you. And, we were very lucky early on in finding Merida Capital Partners, who's one of the, biggest, I guess, cannabis venture institutions in the US. And they came in, probably in our second round of financing, and they've followed through with just about every round. They've been very instrumental in making introductions for us. And so, you find the right investors, certainly makes things much easier.
Yeah, it's good. And great to have that support, yes. I imagine. So thank you for that. Really, really interesting stuff around the entrepreneurial aspect of it. But maybe we can drill down a little bit on the actual topic of compliance in general. And yeah, maybe we just start with, a really kind of general 101 overview on, what type of things does it really encompass when we're talking about? I mean, you don't have to give every example, but some of the high level ones.
Yeah. So, essentially what regulatory and operational compliance means to our licensed operators is, when an enforcement officer comes in, they want to know that you are doing everything that they've asked you to do to operate your business in compliance with that state or local municipality, right? So that could mean anything from books and records. It could mean security, waste management. So there's, whole host of different subjects that falls under this. And, interestingly, this is how complex it gets. So if you even look under, call it books and records, there could be, 30 to 40 different subtitles or subheadings that even go under such a, overlying subject matter. And so it does get rather complex. And this is why, again, I think from early on, lawyers had to be, highly utilized to make sure that these businesses were compliant. But, that's, again, where the software comes into play, ensuring that this happens. But it's quite complex.
I can imagine. And what are some of the sanctions that happen if you aren't compliant?
So, it starts from fines that can be hundreds, if not thousands of dollars, all the way up to losing your license, right? And one of the things we tell people is your most valuable asset as a licensed operator in this industry is your license. And so if, I would think that every operator wants to preserve that license. And if that is the case, doing things by the book and ensuring compliance is the best way to go to sleep at night. Because, again, it could be that you get fined a very small amount, and that's a very relative statement, right? A small amount could be quite large for a smaller operator, but the worst case scenario, you can actually lose your license. And so if you want to preserve it, then make sure you're staying and doing everything by the book. And This is the thing, right, Anuj? I mean, it's a highly regulated industry, just like alcohol and gaming and, the medical drug industry. And so it's the compliance side of it's never going to go away. And so you might as well embrace it now so that, you can really build your business on, on compliance as a focus. And that's what we tell people.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, ultimately, it's to sort of ensure standards, I guess. So it's,
Yeah.
it has a good aim. Are there any kind of major challenges or issues involved in the compliance space, just generally?
Well, I think, part of the problem, well, not a problem per se, but the challenges really has to do with, the operators and whether they have the right resources or the bandwidth to ensure compliance, right? I mean, what you're seeing now is with a lot of the multi-state operators, which, there's a lot of M&A going on, as you know, they actually have robust compliance teams. And even those guys use, software like Simplifya to ensure compliance because of the fact you can have a massive compliance team, but you have now multiple locations, right? And again, if you're trying to stay on top of all those ever-changing regulations, it's really hard. And I think the smaller operators that don't have the luxury of having a compliance team and they don't have the bandwidth, it's really a tougher thing for them to do, right? And so again, whether it's third-party consultants that they use or software like Simplifya, it's not a very easy thing. Unfortunately, the regulatory side of things does not make it very easy for these operators to, not only run their businesses, but, it's a time-consuming effort to stay compliant.
Yeah.
So if you really want to thrive, you unfortunately have to do all those things, I suppose.
Yeah. And I suppose tech solutions like Simplifya and sort of SaaS solutions are useful in terms of information, but I guess you still need a human to operate and oversee it.
Absolutely.
Do you guys advise on that side of things and like advise some of your clients on how to structure the human element of it?
So we don't necessarily advise on how to do that, but people, I know our operators do use Simplifya as a training tool for new employees as well. We've been asked for a lot of different areas, even courses for new employees and certifications. And unfortunately, as a company that's, I don't know, about 50 people, there's only so much bandwidth we have, right? And so we try to stay true to kind of our core competency, and we try to give advice and pointers wherever we can, but we try and stay kind of focused on what we need to do to ensure that our clients are going to succeed as well. But it's about all you could do at this point.
Yeah. And I imagine, I mean, just from a logistics point of view, state and local regulations on top of that's quite a lot and then 50 states or whatever.
Yeah.
That's quite a lot to do, right?
It is. I mean, it really, really is, even as someone that's in this space and trying to help ensure compliance, I mean, I will say it is quite a bit of regulations for these operators to stay on top of. And, I think when federal legalization comes, you're going to have another layer of regulations on top of local and state, although, what we're expecting now is that every state gets to kind of do their own way of, how they want to have cannabis operated, but you will have kind of the federal kind of the federal regs on top of all that. So it's not going to get easier. And this is what we always tell people. It's like, if you start a business with compliance as one of the primary focuses, then maintaining that will be much easier than trying to get there, at the last minute, whether because the regulator is coming in or you're trying to sell your business. It's much easier if you start off on the right foot, like everything else.
Yeah, absolutely. And so, that brings us nicely on to the future. Federal legalization, we talk about it often.
Yep.
How and when are you still seeing that on the horizon?
So, I think before federal legalization comes, I mean, you have the Safe Banking Act, right? That's now, I believe in Senate. I think safe banking will pass. And then, my personal opinion, I don't know if anyone has the crystal ball here, but what I'm hearing and what I'm anticipating is probably latter part of next year, Anuj, in terms of federal legalization in some form or the other. But that's what we're hoping for and expecting. But, one never knows. It could come sooner, it could come later. So, but one thing we know now is that we think we're on the path towards that at a much better pace. But again, it's so hard to say.
Yeah. And I guess from your perspective, I think you mentioned it earlier. Even if that happens, the state will be quite crucial in administering the rules.
Correct. I think the from a federal level, there will be some of their kind of rules and regs, but it's still going to be much more heavily dependent on the state and local. And so, from that perspective, I don't see too much more changing because it's still going to be very, driven by the state and then obviously on a local level. But, you will have probably and definitely some sort of federal, oversight and including interstate and all that stuff. So it should be very interesting to see, but I suspect, it'll evolve over time, just as states have as well.
Yeah, cool. And just to round it all out, what are you seeing as the kind of major challenges to the cannabis industry over the next couple of years?
So, I'll answer it this way. Last year with COVID, one thing I noticed even with Simplify or even the companies I'm involved in is that, we still don't have as much capital, institutional or not, as the industry requires, right? Now I see that changing quite a bit this year with COVID kind of becoming a little bit more of a backdrop, the excitement of investors coming in. But I think, we're still, if you look at other major kind of industries, we're still lacking quite a bit of capital that the industry needs. But I think the challenges are really going to be around, how, again, the federal side kind of handles the legalization of it. But I also think we have a bit of at least on the US side, I don't know how it is anywhere else, but a lot of people that, we have a shortage of good people in the industry as well. So while there are a lot of people hopping into the cannabis industry, it's really hard to find and retain people just because, for example, you hire someone and you're paying them well, and another company will poach them very quickly just because if you have any bit of experience in cannabis industry, everyone wants you, right? And so I think, so the human capital side of it, the actual funding side of it still needs improvement, along with, I think, just ensuring that this goes back to what we've been saying all along, compliance, right? I mean, you have majority folks in America that I think are for legalization of cannabis, but you still have some that are, against it for whatever reason, whether it's personal reasons or not. So I think there still needs to be education around it. I think there still needs to be much more conversations to educate people that don't understand cannabis, right? And so we still have some ways to go, but I think, certainly the challenges we faced 5 years ago or even 10 years ago we've overcome those, but there's more to be done.
Yeah, always.
Yeah.
But it's moving in the right direction, which is good.
Absolutely. I think we absolutely are. And it's been just great to, as you probably appreciate, I know it's just been great to watch just the evolution of this industry that, I think many people didn't think would come. And here we are.
Absolutely. Fascinating. We love it.
Yes.
Cool. Well, thank you for joining me today, Marion. Really appreciate it.
Absolutely. It's my pleasure. Thanks for the great questions, and I appreciate what you do and, in informing your audience in all these different areas. So this is great.
Thank you.
Really appreciate you.
Cool. Cheers, Marion.